Thank you very much, Alex. We are recording this call, everyone, so just an FYI for everyone who's already joined. There'll be many more joining in the next few minutes. As we all know, in this age of Zoom, folks are rolling off of other meetings and scurrying to their next one, just like we used to do from conference room to conference room in the physical world. My name's Tom Stone. I'm with I4CP, and this is our Talent and Learning Next Practices monthly call, part of an ongoing series that we have covering a range of different areas within HR. You can see some of the other upcoming calls that we've got every other week. We're focused on getting hybrid work right. Those calls used to be on Tuesdays. Those are now sprinkled in amongst our other calls at this Thursday time slot from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern time. You see some of the other areas of focus that we also cover: diversity, equity, inclusion. That'll be next coming up February 10th. Talent acquisition on February 24th, strategic HR on March 10th, and we just sort of go in a rotation like that over every 2-month period roughly. And then you see in red in the bottom right, we're very excited for our conference, and I'll say a little bit more about that in just a moment. But before I do, I want to introduce the other gentleman that you see on the screen besides myself, Mr. John Coné, who is our chair of our CLTO board, and you'll find out shortly why it's very appropriate for him to be joining me today. Good morning, John.
Good morning. Thanks for letting me tag along.
Yeah, crash the party. You'll be adding some additional insights and valuable information from that board as we facilitate the discussion today. Wanted to note that this call is being recorded. As I said at the outset, the recordings are available at our Employer Resource Center at the i4cp.com website. Just go to i4cp.com/coronavirus. You can find the recordings of all sessions like this that we've had since March of 2020. This is really something that we started doing open to the public around that time, as we saw, obviously, the HR role, the HR community was going to be increasing in prominence given the pandemic and given everything else that's gone on in the world since then. And we continue to do that here at I4CP. There's also a lot of articles, research, infographics, other materials that we've made publicly available at that section of our website as well. So I'd encourage you to bookmark that and check it out when you can. Want to thank everyone also who's joining around this time, maybe coming in a few minutes late. Please do introduce yourself over in the chat. Let us know where you're coming from today, what company, what title you've got, what organization, whatever you'd like to share. Anything is good, even just your name and a quick hello. If you're not familiar with I4CP, we are the Institute for Corporate Productivity. We are a member-based organization. You can see just a partial list of some of our great member organizations here. Some of these have joined in just the past couple of years. Some of these are longtime members going back many, many years. You see it spans across all sorts of sizes of organizations, all sorts of different industries, and we're proud of all of these companies being members of our organization. We focus on next practices at I4CP. What is a next practice? If you're not familiar, it's something that high-performing organizations do more than low performers. We've got research that we regularly conduct to back up those findings. But they're typically things that are sort of we're bringing to the surface, looking around the corner, what's next? That's why we call them next practices, not simply best practices. And we believe in this sort of research so much that we have an entire conference dedicated to unearthing, sharing, and collaborating on these kind of practices. You see here our next conference coming up fast, March 14th to 17th. This will be in Scottsdale, Arizona at the wonderful Fairmont Hotel, as it has been in years past. Although, of course, not the past 2 years. The past 2 years, we've had online conferences in the fall timeframe in November. Those have been very well attended, great presenters, great speakers, a lot of great discussion and insights shared at those. But truth be told, it wasn't quite the same. And we're all eager to get back to the in-person event. There's no vendors or consultants at this event. So it truly is a great conference for HR leaders, the top of the HR house, to get together in a private way, peer-to-peer sharing, talking to each other. And you can see here, this is only a partial lineup of the speakers. We've got a great collection of authors and thought leaders, HR leaders from very prominent organizations, and other top-notch folks. So if you haven't registered, I realize it's a difficult time. Travel budgets, travel plans still sort of up in the air between Omicron and everything else going on. But if you can make it to the conference, we'd love to have you there. We're running out of room at the hotel, so do book as soon as you can, because we are, even with everything going on, seeing a very strong response. I think people are eager to get back together again in person. Also wanted to just take a quick minute to recognize the 1-year anniversary of the book release, Culture Renovation, 18 Leadership Actions to Build an Unshakable Company. This book was authored by our CEO, Kevin Oakes, who often is co-leading calls like this with me. He has obviously been very much in the news, very busy since the book has come out. You see some of the stats there. He's done a lot of keynotes and media appearances. The book is now in its 5th printing. It's been very popular. Upon release, it shot up to #1 in a number of HR categories on Amazon. It's just been doing very well. The book is based on some research we had conducted at I4CP. And then Kevin, of course, deserves a lot of credit for doing a host of additional interviews and really filling in a lot of the gaps to put it into book form. So congratulations to Kevin Oakes. Congratulations to I4CP with the success of this book. If you don't have it, I encourage you to check it out. There's an Audible version. Obviously, it's at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and elsewhere. All right, let's pivot now. And again, welcome everyone who's joining maybe a few minutes late. Feel free to introduce yourself there in the chat. Great to see so many folks with us here today. Our focus today, for me and John, we're going to facilitate an open discussion around, it's January, so it's a new year. It's always a good time to think about, reflect on the past year or two, but also be looking ahead and thinking about what are the priorities for HR across all HR's functional areas. Maybe what are some predictions? Predictions are a difficult thing to make these days, of course. And we're going to do this by focusing on a report that we come out with each year. And you see it there, the most recent version, the 2022 version. And what this report amounts to, if you're not familiar with it, it is freely available out on our website. We call together and aggregate sort of the best thinking from our various I4CP boards. And you see that we have 6 of these, one for Chief Human Resource Officers, CHROs, one for Chief Diversity Officers, one for Chief Learning and Talent Officers. That's the board that John and I are most closely affiliated with. We have one for Leaders in People Analytics, a board for Leaders in Talent Acquisition, and then a board for Leaders of Total Rewards. And we ask them open answer questions, no prompting. This isn't quantitative data, but just open answer qualitative data. What are your priorities going into the new year? What are your predictions if you want to venture any? And we do this every year, and it's interesting. Some things are sort of perennial priorities across these different areas, but there's always nuances and there's always differences from year to year. So we thought this would be a good time and a good purpose for this call to sort of walk through what the priorities and predictions were specifically to the Chief Learning and Talent Officers Board, since this is, after all, the Talent and Learning Next Practices call. You see here some of the companies that are represented across this report, across all the different functional areas. And again, you can download this report. You see the URL there. I'll ask Alex or Carrie, 2 colleagues on the call, to please put the link to the report over in the chat so you can bring that up and refer to it later. So with that, I want to just quickly note the 4 top priorities of our Chief Learning and Talent Officers Board, and then we're going to dive into each one of these one at a time. So number 1, positioning talent development as the foundation of the employee value proposition, enabling the organization to source skills and capability where and when needed. Number 2, developing new skills for all managers. Number 3, creating a culture of learning. That's sort of a perennial one that often makes this list. And then number 4, supporting the achievement of measurable diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. Notice that one is not setting the goals. It's actually now pivoting to actually achieving the measurable goals that we've already set in recent times. So let's take these one by one. And for this first one, which is all about positioning talent and talent and development really as a foundation for the employee value prop, I want to start by a quote from one of our board members, Michael Killingsworth, who I see is on the call. So Michael, if you can take yourself off mute, I'm going to ask you to chime in a little bit here at this point. Surprise, surprise. Longtime friend of I4CP, Michael. He's been with us across multiple companies where he's been a chief learning officer. His quote was this: "This is a time when we must elevate concern for the employee experience to equal status with our long-held concern for the customer experience. It requires a change in behavior, but more fundamentally, a change in mindset." So Michael, I hope you remember giving us that quote. And can you speak a little bit more about what you were thinking here?
Yeah, I was just going to say, who said that? Yeah, I mean, I being a member of the CLTO board has just been phenomenal for me, and I've represented it in 3 different organizations, and getting the benefit of it has just been amazing. And so, I mean, and we are constantly, we do focus. You saw the priorities that we talk about, but we have to constantly think about when the customer experience is twofold. There's the internal customer, there's the external customer. And so if we as talent and learning professionals must support our employees who work with our external customers in order for our organizations to be productive. And so that's a very critical piece of that, to focus on the external. But to do that, you've got to develop your internal customer and their skills. And a lot, this is, if you focus on changing a behavior and changing a mindset, it's not the easiest thing to do. And a lot of that has to be done very creatively, very innovatively, so that you can make those transformations. And so you can actually see how behaviors, skill sets, mindsets are changing. And that's really a bit of a challenge is changing attitudes. And, people say, you can never change attitudes. You really can't change someone's behavior. And my response to that is that, no, but I can influence it. And you influence it by what you provide from the talent and learning perspective. And a lot of the ideas that I get come from the discussions that we have through this board. Someone will say, oh, I tried this once, or I was thinking about this. And I'm like, I'll take that and I'll just expand on it and say, how can I make this work for our company? And I give credit where credit's due. I say, I learned this from our board. I heard this from one of our board members. I mean, I don't call them out by name, obviously, unless they want me to. But sometimes I do, depends on who they are. But for me to be able to take what we discuss and learn in these conversations and to apply it in my own role is such a huge benefit. And I get that from the board meetings, and I get that from the conference every year as well.
Thanks, Michael. John, I saw you came off mute. Do you have some further thoughts here?
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things, it virtually goes without saying, maybe I'll say it once and then we're done with it, that the pivot, the response to the pandemic changed a lot of things. One of the things that it created was even more transparency. And as I've talked to a number of people on the board, Michael included, one of the things they talk about is that, especially as more people were working remote, people in the organization got a view of the technology and the focus that was deployed to serve the customer, and naturally began to say, why isn't my experience that friendly, that easy, that fast? If we went to tremendous lengths to set things up so a customer could do business with 1 or 2 clicks, why is it taking me, 3 days or 3 weeks and 15 clicks and 2 phone calls to get what I need? So a lot of our board members are recognizing that this is a time when, sure, nothing's more important than serving the customer, but it turns out that serving the employee is as important. I think Michael captured that well.
Yeah, definitely, equal status here. Something I've mentioned, some companies, very few probably, but some have even been a little bit bolder in their language and actually elevated the employee experience above that of the customer experience, just to sort of really drill home and make that point. My colleagues here at I4CP can probably predict what I'm about to mention. I live in Rochester, New York, and it's headquarters, hometown. We're very proud of our Wegmans grocery store chain. And they are a company that for a long time, not just during the pandemic, but for literally decades, have always said, we don't put our customers first. We put our employees first. They've actually had that in their marketing materials explicitly. And it's really created a great deal of goodwill in the community to know that about the company, but it's actually produced outstanding results. Going back to, I think, 1998, when I believe it's Fortune magazine, right, has their top 100 best places to work. Not surprisingly, Wegmans, because of that philosophy, has been on that list every single year since then, often in the top 10. Once they were number 1. And for a grocery store chain with a lot of low-level, entry-level employees to be that high, they're not the only one that makes the list. Publix down in the Southeast often does as well. But Wegmans is always at the top of that. It's simply amazing. And it's because they take this, this sort of view that the two of you are articulating even a step further, at least in their rhetoric, and saying that their employee experience, how they treat their employees, is of the utmost importance.
And I will mention also that at least 3 different board members on the CLTO board are engaged right now in some sort of an audit. Basically, the notion is we have all these ways that we measure customer experience, and yet historically measuring employee experience was an annual attitude survey. And a lot of organizations now are auditing their systems and their processes and are implementing pulse checks and all sorts of new ways to track and report on the employee experience in their company.
Something else you mentioned, John, that I just wanted to touch on. You noted, employees look around at the technology and they've seen maybe more and new technologies over these past 2 years, particularly those maybe working from home. But there's still this disconnect between the technology that some have at work versus what they have in their personal lives. I think we're far ahead in terms of consumer technology still compared to what we see at a lot of companies. I mean, just think within talent and learning, while they've come a long way in some cases, particularly if you have a learning experience platform and LXP maybe on top of your LMS, are the interfaces as smooth and as clean as what we see from Netflix or from our Apple devices? In most cases, they're not, and in some cases, they're drastically not. I've used the adage in the past that people are used to having the Jetsons at home, but the Flintstones at work, and that it's a difficult comparison, and it really does hinder the employee experience a great deal, given they know what's possible from user interfaces, they know what's possible from tech support, and so on. All right, I wanted to bring up these 2 paragraphs from the report, and I'm just going to take the time to read them because I'd really like to get some discussion on this. We said in the report, a resignation wave is only one obvious challenge. The market for IT and healthcare workers remains hugely competitive, as we've all seen, as are fields such as engineering, sales, customer service, finance, logistics, and skilled trades. Shortages are felt in all jobs and at all levels. This requires an all-hands-on-deck approach across HR that addresses the many factors involved in talent retention and attraction. So for us as talent and learning leaders will rise to the occasion in the new year by refocusing on, and where necessary, renovating their employee value propositions. In the last 2 years, people have reconsidered their working lives and priorities. They have developed deeper concerns about their safety, their well-being, the meaning of career, and the importance of purpose in their work. This intentionality and reflection on life and work has led employees to recognize where change is needed. They want their work to be judged on clear goals and outcomes, not with physical presence and office politics. They want forward-looking learning and career development opportunities, such as microlearning and job rotations, not stale, lengthy, and ineffective training courses. And most of all, they want flexibility wherever possible, from hybrid and remote work arrangements to new workday and work week options. So just to quickly summarize what that is saying, there's this need to renovate, or at least look at again, your employee value proposition. And this is coming from lots of areas. The 2 called out here: deeper concerns about safety and well-being, reflections on meaning of career and purpose of work. And then what this will require, again, many things will be required, but the 3 called out here: a change to how performance management is conducted, forward-looking L&D opportunities, and flexibility in work location, days of week, times of day. So I'd like, there's a lot here. I'd like to open it up to get some reflections from those on the call. Feel free to raise your hand in Zoom, just come off mute. I should be able to notice either of those. Would love to hear more from Michael or John on this, as well as any other, in particular, members of the board that are with us. I did see Rob Lauber on the call. So Rob, I certainly always welcome your insights, but really open it up to anyone. thoughts on this sort of transformation that we've all been through over the past 2 years, and how are you going about reevaluating your employee value proposition, whether it's the things you see on the screen or otherwise? Anyone doing anything in these areas that is particularly, we could say, unique, or that you've seen really good results from, even if it's not so unique? What are some things that have been tried?
Hey, Tom, Rob here.
Hey, Rob.
Not on camera, sorry.
That's all right.
Coming off of COVID, so not looking my best today. So you'll have to live with a picture of me. The couple companies I've been working with have been really talking about and focused on sort of filtering what their offer, what their proposition is to employees through the filter of flexibility and future. So in one company that I'm working with has a lot of frontline employees. So flexibility means something different than work from home and hybrid.
Mm-hmm.
It means more schedule flexibility, being focused on sort of work-life flexibility. They're healthcare focused and do a lot of COVID testing. So they're a bit slammed at the moment. So they're super sensitized to that flexibility piece. And then, thinking about a future, how are they making sure that the people that come to work for them can see some sort of future, either through skill development or career progression, and how well are they articulating what a career path might look like for people in the organization, are sort of the filters that they're really examining, and looking at what their proposition is. And it's been a pretty insightful and powerful kind of exercise for the organization as well. Because when they started thinking about it along those simple themes and talking to people about what it was they were looking for, they realized they were misaligned in quite a few areas. And it didn't take dramatic change, but really sort of fine tuning around messaging and fine tuning around offerings they thought were more important to people, but actually are less important to people.
Well, that's very good to hear. One of the things that's come through over these past 2 years is just the supreme importance of listening to employees and relooking at our so-called listening strategies. Instead of doing once a year engagement surveys, doing at least quarterly, if not monthly, or more regular pulses. I know Microsoft is well known, I think Amazon as well, for doing almost daily pulses of, obviously just a slice of your employee population, but getting that feedback, particularly if there's a chance that things could be misaligned, as you just said, whether it's around benefits or around just other aspects of the EVP. So great to hear that they're doing that practice of more intense and intentional listening and actually seeing some real insights come from it.
Tom, I was going to jump in with a couple of things. One is I happen to see a question in the chat that says, how many companies have a written statement that says this is our employee value proposition? We've got about 40 members on the CLTO board, and the majority of them have such written statements, though they may not be, it may not say here is our employee value proposition, but you'll find it in their recruiting materials on their website, those kinds of things. But some of them even call it that. Most of the rest are working on them. But the thing I find most interesting is I think the leading thinkers on our CLTO board have said, before we publish anything, we're going to make certain that we're actually providing it. Because oftentimes we make aspirational statements. This is how we want things to be, and I think leading edge practitioners now are saying, no, first we're going to make sure that we're actually doing that. And I was also going to mention that members of the board who are getting very practical about this right now have realized that they have a new responsibility to the employee value proposition around creating time and space and occasions for development. That historically, in the old world of work, we brought people into a conference room and then they got together and things happened. And the pandemic happened at a time where a lot of development was being created for a class size of one, micro learning, those kinds of things, which are fabulous and need to happen. Everybody's doing it. but they have discovered that a part of the employee value proposition is they have to create these occasions for people to develop and to develop with other people to get connections. And that's a big part of the role of talent development that I'm seeing around the employee value proposition.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that last point, John. A lot of organizations had to pivot to more online virtual classroom style training in early 2020. And ever since then, we did some data study on this in October, and I've shared that, I think, on this call previously. And there's a blog post out on our website that has some of that data. I mentioned that, though, because that was an opportunity. Of course, initially, it was an urgency situation. But throughout the time since then, a lot of instructional design folks, a lot of trainers, a lot of training managers have been more intentional around what things are people best learning together, and what things can you learn or prep learn, flip the classroom and so on ahead of time maybe, and then get people together for that intentional, like you called it, an occasion for learning, but learning together. Socially, whether it's online or hopefully again soon, more and more in person again. And I think that's something that was long overdue in a sense. For financial reasons, a lot of training programs in the past would be 5 days long because you had to justify the travel involved to the training site. And so some of those programs were a bit bloated, not having, learning objectives that necessarily benefited from learning together. But as we pivot and redesign things, I've seen a lot of intentionality from the members of our board and just other companies that I've talked to during this redesign phase, maybe skinny that 5 day down to 2 days, have it be a blended mix of learning together, whether it's online or in person, with some self-paced learning in there. And it just makes the moments where you're learning together that much more powerful because there's some real thought put into it.
I would say also, I noticed that we had somebody from Ecolab on the call. Ecolab has been one of our COTO board members. And one of the things that they have talked about is that this was always true for them, but especially now, every occasion of learning is also an occasion to communicate and reinforce the culture of the organization, which turns out to be a critical aspect of the EVP.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Heather. Thanks for joining us. You're a regular on these calls, so good to see you here again. You've sort of put out an ask to everyone in the chat there, or folks that maybe want to come off mute. You're asking, we'd welcome specific examples of collaborative learning experiences that are engaging employees, particularly those that bring cohorts together, even if digitally or virtually. So we'd love to hear folks that have some good examples, maybe things that are pretty fresh or new from the past couple of years. Please chime in there in the chat or raise your hand, come off mute. Would love to hear examples.
Sure. I'd like to share. This is Robin Moriatis from Legend Biotech.
Hi, Robin.
Yeah, hi, how are you today?
Good.
And thank you for putting this event together. It's been very helpful. So as I'm building the leadership development skills program at Legend, in my previous environment prior to going on board with Legend, I was doing a lot of internal coaching to really help pull through a lot of the concepts that we were working on in regards to our programs and skills that we were developing with our leaders. And by offering the one-on-one and then sometimes even group coaching sessions, it was really invaluable to be able to help really drive that content and drive their specific performance forward. So here at Legend, we have made that decision to also include coaching as part of our leadership development skills programming. And we have just recently launched it. And I'm very happy to say, it's a tremendous value proposition that we are offering.
That's great. Yeah, I hear more and more organizations, coaching has been around for a long time as a part of our sort of portfolio, our quiver of L&D arrows, if you will. But it's something that I think often hasn't been as formalized as it could be in some organizations. Right. And so I'm glad to hear that it's working well for you and that it's a focus.
Yes, exactly.
Michael.
Thank you.
Tom, I'll just add you when you were talking about it, we do blended learning. Obviously, at some of our programs, you do some online, strictly online and virtual, and we're blending more as people are starting to come back to development that's in person. One of the things that we are requiring for every program that we roll out, if you do, even if it's a half a day program, is that we require all the employees to also establish team meetings with their colleagues, with their managers, with their other colleagues, that if you're coming in for this, that the second half of the day or the next day would be meeting with that so that we can expand their network and strengthen their colleague teamwork. And at the end of the program, we actually say, based on the additional meetings that you've set up and joining with your colleagues, what part of this program are you going to apply to those meetings? How are you going to take this forward immediately and apply those skills, whether it's communication or engagement or whatever? So we always take advantage of having them put their skills and what they've learned immediately to practice. And we get feedback from them immediately because they tell other colleagues who come and tell us, hey, I heard so-and-so went on this program.
Well, that's great. I love lots of things about that. It's got a relationship strengthening aspect to it for sure, which we need, all the more during these remote and hybrid times, and perhaps indefinitely if we're going to be hybrid for a long period of time. But I also like the combating the forgetting curve aspect of it. Those that have been in L&D a long time know that you can sit through the best lecture, the best training, the most interactive and engaging program available, but if you don't put things into practice very quickly afterward, your memory, unless you've got a photographic memory somehow, your memory and the skill building that you might have done quickly falls off. And so not just doing it once like you're suggesting, but doing it periodically over time is what can really help to cement those skills, cement that knowledge, those new concepts. Before I move on to some others here, a quick question for you, Michael. Matt asked, how do you evaluate that? I think you were starting to touch on that at the end, people saying that they're very happy with it. So what are you doing for evaluation?
Yeah, so we do, everyone that goes on a program, we do follow up with them after the program, like 3 months or 6 months later, to see how they've actually applied it. Matter of fact, just before this, I was just finished with a group who had completed a course 2 months ago, and we were doing a recap of what they've applied and what they've learned and what's coming next in their career. So we do follow up with that, which is we find very important to see how they have applied it. But the other thing that we do is we get their input. They go and tell somebody else about the program, and that somebody will either come to us and say, this was great and this wasn't so great. So selfishly, we immediately get feedback, which is really beneficial from the individuals. So you can evaluate it based from us bringing them back 2-3 months later, and it's not always bringing them back. In several of these, we set up a virtual reconnect just to see what have they applied, what have they learned, and what are they going to learn next, what do they want to apply next. And then we see our programs getting more enrollment based on them sharing it with other colleagues.
That's great. I thought I saw one hand raised. I didn't know if that was inadvertent. Yeah, Ashley.
Hey, Tom. Yeah, so I was just going to chime in a little bit, piggyback onto some of what Robin had mentioned, and I know Molly had put this in the chat as well. One of the things that we did to kind of help bring this all together, but also create some learning experiences, and I would just say cohort experiences around this, is we developed at the end of last year what we called the culture playbook, and it brought together elements of core values as well as, I would just say, like our employee value proposition, but bringing the culture to life. So it was more like, okay, culture is not a statement, it's not a sentence, it's not something you're going to see on our website or on the wall when you come in, but we need to bring it to life. And that means that we turn it into behaviors and new habits. And so what we did as part of our listening strategy last year, as we were developing it, was really getting input from a lot of different layers of the company interactively. So not just like as part of like our strategy with our surveys, but a lot of, I would say, just focus groups or cohorts and feedback as we developed it. And then now moving into this year, we're also bringing that to life. So we're doing what we're calling like manager roundtables and saying, okay, part of the culture is that we want you guys to establish team norm agreements. And We want you to actually, schedule meetings differently, create agendas differently, actually do something very different. And that is a new habit. That is a new skill. And so then on top of the manager roundtables, we're also creating what we're doing some additional, I would say, associate feedback loops as well. And that's been phenomenal. We've had really great feedback on that because we're not just like doing it through a survey, but we're really saying we're bringing this to life and getting the feedback from a lot of different layers. And it is building new habits and new behaviors. And that doesn't happen overnight, but just kind of bringing some of those elements together that you guys were all just talking about has been a great way for us to make some progress in that space.
I love that, Ashley. I love the intentionality of what you're doing. It sounds like aligned with our book and our research that there were probably some pivots and changes along that way, some renovation of the culture going along. But I love what you kept coming back around to, the focus on bringing it to life. It's like you said, it's not, culture isn't just a statement. It isn't a poster on the wall. It isn't the office location. I think a lot of senior leaders over the years put way too much emphasis on the office location somehow being a main part of the culture of the organization. And it's not that it plays no part, it's just not nearly as significant a part as maybe they were thinking. So love that. I love the intentional actions of bringing the culture to life. While we've been talking here, I had this data up on the screen. This was one of the questions that we asked in our workforce readiness study from over the summer. We asked, what current practices does your organization use to support the continuous skilling of its employees? And you see some of the sort of obvious responses here, using a learning platform. 2/3 or more, I would say, of organizations do that. Performance management practices that support upskilling and reskilling, sort of taking a look at PM again. I've highlighted here offering job rotations, 31%, so only about 1/3 of organizations sort of formally focused on job rotations, but it was the one out of all of these that correlated to market performance. I mentioned earlier our focus at I4CP on next practices. We love to look for things that correlate to stronger profit, revenue, customer satisfaction, and market share. And we sort of look at the high performing organizations versus the lower and sort of tease out which practices. And usually per study, there's only a small handful, and this was one of them, offering job rotations. And in retrospect, it's not surprising, because learning from actually doing the work, doing the job, is a great way to learn. Not that training and coaching aren't valid and very useful as well, but actually being put on the job and immersed in it. It's no wonder that would correlate to stronger market performance to some degree. Wanted to note for I4CP members on the call, a couple of years ago, we came up with a very detailed guide of how to use job rotation programs for your upskilling and reskilling initiatives. So if you haven't downloaded those, maybe you're a newer member, might not have known it existed. That's still a very relevant resource that we did in conjunction with Upskill America and the Aspen Institute. So just wanted to note this. It's been up on the screen for a while. We don't need to dive into it. If anyone has been focusing on job rotation, I know, for example, Ford Motor Company has been doing a lot to revive job rotation at their company. I talked with them a few months ago. But if any of you have been focused on it, would love to hear more about that. You can share in the chat or feel free at any time to just interrupt and tell us what you're doing there. But I'd also like to move on to, just in the interest of time, one of the other big priorities for the CLTO board, and that was developing and really focusing on new skills needed for our managers and leaders. And here, Deborah Ross from BNSF Corporation, one of our CLTO board members, said this: people are being called into bigger jobs much faster than before. Many, even those we regard as high potentials, may have not yet developed some of the basic skills required for success. We need to discover and fill those gaps. Here to Deborah. Also from the report, we focused on the high potentials of yesterday, if they're even still with the company, have been promoted once or twice and will flounder in various areas like hiring, onboarding, performance management, developing their teams, and so on. So I want to pause here and get some reactions from folks on the call. Would love to hear from John or Michael or Rob or Ashley, but also any other new voices if you want to come off mute. What are your thoughts here? What are you doing for manager and leader development, perhaps in light of some changes that have gone on over the past couple of years?
I'm always ready to fill the auditory void. I will make a couple of comments. One is a large number of board members have talked about the fact that they are creating or already have created what they refer to as a manager handbook for the future workplace, because there are so many decisions that have been pushed down to the manager level. And this really is new territory for many of them. Go to the most basic is, gee, if people want to work sometimes at the office and sometimes at home, as a manager, you have to figure out, well, do my people, if they're going to be at work, do they all need to be at work on the same day? Or is it okay if they're at work on different days? And how does that work? And how do I make those rules? So, and in fact, I've talked to at least 3 of our board members who are now working on version 2 of their manager handbook for the future workplace, because we've gotten through the first wave of managerial issues. But we're also dealing now in sort of the second wave with issues about people who no longer feel safe in the workplace, and what do you do about that? And how do you deal with some people who want a certain level of contact with other people in the office and other people who don't? So there's a ton of work being done around creating essentially handbooks for managers. Sort of the thing that you were talking about and that Deborah was talking about is actually the part B that they're discovering, because part A was, it was easy to see all this new stuff that managers are going to have to do. Part B that's going into the handbooks now is, I don't know how we got away with not being real good at listening before. I don't know how we got away without being real good at coaching or giving performance feedback before, but we can't get away with it anymore. So it's going in the handbook.
Right, or management, performance management based on outcomes, not just based on who's in the office and politics and so on. You were touching on it there by sort of noting the evolution of these management guidebooks already. Kelly asked in the chat, how are organizations going to keep these updated? She could see constant changes needed. So have you heard from anyone around the change management of these new resources?
I can tell you, I only know of 2, and again, I don't name organizations because I haven't asked their permissions to do so, but there are two members of the board who basically have tied in the continuous, if you will, continuous improvement of their manager handbook to their employee listening strategy. They have a process now where they go out and talk to employee groups and tap into employee resource groups and those kinds of things. And so they're gathering on a weekly basis the kind of information that feeds into the revisions. And at least one of them sort of has, because it's an online, it's a virtual rather than a physical book, actually has a section that's titled something like, latest, greatest, things you need to know right now. So managers know to go look there to see emerging information, emerging issues, and they put tools in there as well. So, and a lot of these are tools that we have had, performance support tools that we've had for decades, but they're getting used now because they're being linked to a really current issue that a manager knows she or he is going to have to deal with this week.
Love the fact that they have what's new sections or maybe release notes, maybe taking a page from software companies and things when they release updates. Great to see that feature. Wanted to bring this up maybe to spur some more conversation from folks on the call. We did a study in December of 2020, so a little over a year ago, where we asked about 69 different leadership behaviors, which of these have increased in importance throughout that early first year of the pandemic. Pretty much all 69 increased in importance. But what was interesting about the study was which ones were more often or to a greater extent increased in importance. And those, we sort of highlighted 14 of them. They fell into 5 buckets here. These aren't obviously behavior statements, but these are the categories: well-being, transparency, understanding, agility, and digital mindset. I don't think that those concepts would surprise anyone, but what was fascinating was just how strongly some of these had increased. The very top 3 out of all 69 behaviors were all well-being related behaviors. And I think that's continued throughout all of 2021. But what's striking is that if we had asked this question, what leadership behaviors are more important today than, say, if we'd asked it in 2017 versus 2000, there's no way well-being related behaviors would have been top of the list. Maybe productivity behaviors or other things would have been at the top of the list. So we're definitely living in different times. And I'm curious, any of these 5 categories and the behaviors that would be subsumed under them, any of these strike anyone on the call? Have you had specific focus or attention in some of your management training, coaching, development programs in certain areas here? Or has it had to be more of an all of the above type of thing because managers are having to focus on all these areas? Hey, Sonia. You're on mute, but yeah,
Hi.
thank
Yeah,
you.
here we go. Thanks. Yeah, something we've done, not necessarily the managerial training focus, but well-being has been a real focus for us for the last, I would say, 4 years. And we've created an internal Wise and Well program and we've actually seen really good results on our benefits side of this, where we are we give stipends to people for very non-traditional well-being, I guess what we would, I don't think we'd consider them non-traditional necessarily now, but formerly non-traditional well-being resources. So if you're going to go and train for a marathon, we'll actually pay for your marathon entrance fees. If you want to go do stretch therapy, acupuncture, other sorts of well-being ideas that people and modalities that aren't necessarily covered by traditional medical benefits, where we give stipends for that. We're also doing a program. We did some research, and I'll tell you, it's done a great job with not only employee morale. I mean, the comments we get back from the employees, like, thank you so much for seeing that, just going to the doctor isn't the only way that I deal with my well-being. Cooking classes is something that will also, could be part of that stipend. But we're seeing it also in our actual insurance claims. So we're actually being able to tie some of this together, and it's kind of doing a 2-for-1. And this last year, what we did see as we were doing the analysis is that people were not doing their well visits in 2020 and 2021, which we sort of understand. So we're actually even incentivizing that and saying that if you go do that, you get an extra $100 towards any of your well-being programs. So I will say our employees have really taken on to this. Most employees take advantage of it in some way, shape, or form. And it has just been an amazing employee satisfier, as well as actual medical cost reduction so far. It's a correlation. I mean, we can't give the exact, it's a correlation, but we're seeing the numbers as we've done this every year. We see different numbers in our claims. So
and not just the well visits, but I've read lots of articles, I'm sure many of you have as well, people not taking their paid time off, not taking vacations. In fact, I think a lot of people have a lot of that. If it carried over into the 2022 calendar year, hopefully people will be using that time soon. Perhaps not all the same day, that could cripple business, but spread out as soon as possible, because I think it's important. All right, let me pivot here. We've only got 10 minutes left. I'd like to at least hit on one more of our priorities from the CLTO board, and that was creating a culture of learning. Susie Long, one of our CLTO board members, again called out in the report. She's from Bridgestone Americas. She said, a new and critical aspect of creating an exceptional talent marketplace, not to mention great career support for employees, is stopping first to reconsider what jobs we really need, what work really needs to get done. And I place this under the heading of creating a culture of learning, because I think we do need more data in order to do this really effectively. A couple of interesting data points from our workforce readiness study. We found that insufficient data about people's current skills and capabilities was the #1 barrier to having a ready workforce. Only 18% of companies had a skills database in place, and only 10% had one that covers all employees. And then interestingly, when we posed the question, does LinkedIn know more about your employees than you do? Only 27%, over 1/4, said yes. And so that's a pretty striking finding there. So I think that focusing on a culture of learning across the organization is something that we definitely need to do. But we also need more data about our employees. When it comes to specific practices around a culture of learning, we also did ask about that directly in the Accelerating Total Workforce Readiness study. And you see here, and I wanted to bring this up because it harkens back to one of the comments shared earlier around the importance of coaching. You see here, all 6 of these practices are done more often by high-performing organizations, the blue bar, versus the low. And the #1 most common was exactly that. Leaders are regularly involved in coaching others. 61% of high-performing organizations said they do that as part of a culture of continuous learning versus only 34% of low performers. Also included here, I always like to highlight not just coaching, but involving leaders regularly as teachers, including them as presenters, as faculty in your actual training programs. That's something that we've long identified as a high-performance organization practice at I4CP and research over the years. We had a study with ATD a number of years ago that flagged that, and interesting to see that it's still not done super often, but done far more by high performers than low. So take a look at these different practices here, and I'd love to hear some comments from folks on any of these, on coaching, on leaders as teachers, as simply having continuous learning be a sort of organizational formal value. Any thoughts on these? Anything anyone is doing that you'd like to share? How are you making continuous learning a top value at your organization?
So Tom, I'll just say really quick, we call this LDL philosophy, which is leaders developing leaders. And every program that we're rolling out, we identify leaders, we go out and invite them to come and to contribute a part of the program. As a result, they start talking to their colleagues who tell their colleagues, and they come to me saying, matter of fact, someone just stopped by and said, can I come speak at your next program? It's just placed a note on my door. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So it's like, it's contagious. You give them the opportunity to share their wisdom and their knowledge and their experience.
Leave it to you, Michael, to create a virtuous cycle effect in your organization. It doesn't surprise me, given what I know of you, but it's great to hear that that's happening. Sonia, I think I saw you as well.
Yeah, I would say that this has been something that is a core value of what we do when we do our training. And part of it is we're a professional engineering and science firm. And the whole idea is that our leaders have the experience to be able to, not only the street cred, right, because they've been in their shoes, but they have the experiences to be able to develop that next generation. And so one of the things that we just launched right before the pandemic, and we're sort of reformatting right now, is a business development training where we have our emerging leaders actually being the facilitators. And then we bring in senior leaders to be partners in that program where it's a truly hands-on working with real client business development things. So you're getting kind of 3 generations, so to speak, in the room.
Love it. Love it. I saw Michael put his double thumbs up for that. I mean, that's taking it to another level, because now you're getting some sort of presentation skill development, further development of those emerging leaders being coached and sponsored by the more senior leaders, but you're still getting the perspective from those senior leaders that you would get if they were the teacher. So that's just taking the whole leaders as teachers concept to even a 3rd level, if you will. Love it. Molly, I see you've got your hand raised as well. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. So we are a construction firm, and we've got just an insane amount of work right now. And the thing that's challenging for us when developing learning is that people don't want to set aside the time to make it so formalized. And so a way for us to continue that regular learning and sharing from that lower level or entry level employee to our more senior folks is developing topics of things that people share and say, these are the things I'm interested in. And then we have learning circles. And so I'm just there to kind of coordinate, but people come, and the whole goal is me not presenting or anyone particular presenting, but sharing challenges that they're having, successes that they've had, and any resources that they could share with anyone else. And so the bar is so low for entry in terms of what they need to do to participate, but nobody walks away with feeling that wasn't worthwhile, or I've seen that before. It's so personalized because people can either say, oh, I'm going through that same thing, we should talk outside of this meeting, or, oh, I can see how that could be a challenge for me, and now I'm more prepared, or here's the resource I used, and they can share it amongst each other. So it doesn't need so much development as it does is just arranging the people or the platform, those occasions we were talking about earlier, for people to share.
Yeah, I love that. It harkens back to a lot of companies, factories that would have, every morning stand-up meetings where it shared some information with the leader for 5 minutes, and then a round table around the room, literally people just standing, not even gathered in a room, but on the factory floor, sharing, what did you learn? What went wrong yesterday? What did you do? Who helped? Recognize some people, and then let's get on with our day. I love those kinds of informal approaches can often be the most impactful, and particularly for the short term, boosting productivity and improving learning that just have so many different benefits. So
yeah, it happens in our field too. So in the offices, but also on each individual job site every single day.
Wonderful. Love hearing that. All right, well, we only have a couple of minutes left. Somehow I do have a few minutes for this last priority from the board. So I do want to share this and just touch on it briefly. Supporting the achievement of measurable diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. Just have the one slide here. What's important to call out here is the difference between setting the goals, which many organizations either did or updated in 2020 after the death of George Floyd and after all of the protests and everything. But what about progress being made? And so we asked this in a recent, I believe it was a Pulse survey, to what extent has your organization made significant pledges? You see 76% indicating they have, but only 28% honestly indicating that progress has been made. So there's a lot that can be done here. It's not all on the shoulders of learning and talent leaders, of course. If you have a chief diversity officer, I'm sure they're leading the charge on that, but talent and learning has a role to play. And some of that can be inward reflection and looking at our training programs, expanding them beyond just bias, anti-bias training or anti-sexual harassment training, as was always the case, and expanding into things like inclusion, belonging. I know a lot of companies have developed programs or roundtables, learning circles on allyship and more, and there's still more that can be done. The images there on the right are the bias audit checklists specifically for learning and development that I4CP created about a year ago. We've created a lot of these bias audit checklists for pretty much all areas of HR. Again, just one of the many member benefits for our I4CP members. So just wanted to call this out. We're at the end of our hour, but just wanted to note the disparity between the number of organizations that have made these kind of goals and pledges and where we are in terms of progress. I think a lot of work still to be done. It's a good reflection point as we close out here for everyone on the call. So wanted to thank John for being with us, helping to bring some additional voice from the CLTO board. I want to thank Rob and Michael, also from the board themselves, who shared their insights, and everyone who participated today. I loved the chat that was going on. Appreciate the help from Carrie and Kevin and others who chimed in with some of the conversation over there in the chat. You saw the list earlier of our next events. We meet this time every Thursday. So if the topic is of interest to you, next week we'll be on hybrid work again. And then after that, we'll be spinning through some of the other functional areas of HR. So encourage you to sign up for all of them, get them on your calendar, and then you can join us if it's convenient for you. But with that, I wish everyone a wonderful rest of their day. Hope you have a great week. Thank you.